the economy continues to go nowhere, contracting in the fourth quarter. That news out on Wednesday. And then, of course, the Obama people spinning it, somehow saying that it's the Republicans' fault, or now it's John Boehner's fault, or it's somebody's fault, but not their fault. And the beat goes on. So when we're trying to figure this economy out and where we're going, we go to our go-to guy on the economy, and that is Kris Weaver, who is the president of the Kris Weaver real estate team, our economic guru. We keep having Kris back on the show because his predictions are golden. They're money in the bank. Kris, great to have you with us.
Good morning, John and Steve. How you guys doing?
Doing well. Glad you're here.
We're doing fine. And why don't we start, Kris, with the economic news on Wednesday. Very shocking. GDP, the economy contracted by 0.1%. Analysts had predicted economic growth, which was supposed to be an anemic 1% to 1.2, 1.3%. That was off by 130%. And we actually went south. And especially in the fourth quarter, you figure if you can't grow the economy during the holidays, what are you going to do going forward with that? I mean, how bad are things out there?
Well, I think people were still very cautious going into the fourth quarter, and I'm not surprised at all that 2012, that GDP was, null to negative, in reflection of last year. I still do think that 2013 we are going to see some GDP growth. I do think it's going to be moderate. Housing, as I've been talking about earlier, is going to continue to move forward. I think the builders are really going to get into the game. So the GDP growth as related to residential structures being built is obviously going to go up quite a bit. I also think that as far as jobs go, the job market is pretty good for job seekers right now. Not as good as of course as it was in 2005 or so, but a pretty good job market nonetheless. So we are seeing a lot of signs of strength, especially here in Virginia and D.C. So I do think 2013 is going to be a year of growth. But when you look at it reflectively for 2012, we did see contraction, a small amount, and not surprised at all with that.
Well, it's a tough thing because I've said this many times. When you look at the potential of us growing out of the recession, or certainly growing the economy to the 5% growth level, which we had under President Clinton and when Newt Gingrich was the speaker, I mean, that is the driving reason why we were able to run a surplus. Man, we are a long way, Kris, from, I can't even imagine right now when we would be growing our economy at the clip of 5%. I can't even envision it.
Well, John, we're just not. I mean, that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, we spent our way into 100% debt to GDP, and that's not going to happen for quite a while. Historically, when you look at debt to GDP ratios over 90%, which of course we're at about 100 when you combine intragovernmental debt combined with public debt, the country stays stuck in that position for quite a long time. Overall GDP growth lags behind by about 1 to 1.5% when debt to GDP ratios are as high as we're at right now. And the worst part is the average overhang that a country tends to stay in that ratio, I believe, is about 23 years. So we've spent our way into the position we are now. 5%, 6, 7% GDP growth is not going to allow us the easy way to get out of it. So we're going to have to take measures, and there's several different ways we could do that.
So, Kris, big question here. Where do you think interest rates are going and why right now, especially in view of the economic report on GDP growth we just got 2 days ago?
Well, I think the GDP growth report that we got recently is actually going to be, most people don't realize it, but things work conversely with interest rates. I think the report that just came out is actually going to keep interest rates lower. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw long-term rates and even short-term rates drop just a little bit right now for longer term investments. And the reason being is, as the economy appears to be slowing, the threat of inflation is lower. So the likelihood of the Fed increasing key benchmark interest rates is going to be lower, which is going to translate into lower interest rates over the next few months as far as what you see being originated. I still do think that inflation is definitely happening. The wage inflation is happening. We've seen that with our own business here, where we've had to pay our employees more, that's going to lend itself to increase in rates over time. I think the rates are going to go up quite a bit by the third or fourth quarter of this year, and I think that inflation will be alive and well at that point.
Common Sense News Time coming up on 7:20 here on the John Frederick Show. Editorial Director Steve Ray here along with our guest, financial and real estate guru Kris Weaver, who joins us at least once a week, and a very important guest to us because these numbers need to be broken down. And Kris, we're about an hour and a few minutes away from the Labor Department releasing the critical jobs numbers for January. Most people think it'll drop the unemployment rate down to maybe 7.7, only about 170,000 jobs targeted for January. The question I have for you, even if these numbers make the hiring look somewhat better than the government initially found, isn't there more of a problem reflected in how the government's methodology for these seasonal adjustments affect the market in terms of its yo-yoing whenever we see these numbers, which apparently they just can't get right the first time around?
I mean, when you seasonally adjust a number, it's really very, very difficult to compare. I think the best thing to do is look at the actual empirical number and then look at that year over year, where things are going. One thing to keep in mind is, the population of the country is starting to remain the same. So if you bake in any population adjustments to those numbers, the numbers really aren't going to make a whole lot of sense. I think it makes a lot more sense just to use an unseasonally adjusted number and then compare that retrospectively to where we were in the previous years.
Gotcha. And another number that comes out this morning just before 10 a.m. is the final reading of consumer sentiment in January, which they believe will edge up marginally to maybe 71.5 from the 71.3. And that number means virtually nothing to me or the average Joe. What does it mean to you in terms of how we look at the remaining fiscal issues, such as the debt ceiling, and how economists view this?
Well, I mean, it really relates to activity. As consumer sentiment increases, activity increases. People buy more things, more goods, more services, which continues to spur on the economy. I think that during the course of this year, we're going to see inflation, but at the same time, you're going to have more people that are employed. That number is going to improve. I don't think it's going to go back to where it was during the good days, but it's going to improve, and there's going to be more activity in the market. So that's going to be positive, and like I was mentioning earlier, it's going to lend itself to GDP growth in the economy. However, very, very tepid. Obviously single digit, 1-2%.
Yeah.
3 if we're absolutely lucky.
So the direction of consumer spending as they look at those variables, does that affect the housing market for you, or is consumer spending based on basic consumption of food and gas and that type of thing?
Well, two things are going to reflect into the housing market. Number one is sentiment. The home buyer, the home sales market is a very, if you want to call it, very emotional market. And then the other factor, of course, is the price of homes and the cost of funds. Price of homes right now is at an all-time low. Cost of funds is at an all-time low when you relate it to average household income. So the price of a house versus average household income, if you trend that back in history, dozens of several decades, you'll find that current pricing is at its lowest ratio of household income. Also, the cost of funds, the cost that you're going to borrow the money for in the form of a mortgage, is also at a long-time low. So if you have increasing sentiment, low prices, low cost of funds, at least for the short term, you're going to see a very robust housing market, which is what we've seen. We've seen demand outstrip supply. But Steve, the biggest problem is, going back to our debt issue. Something's got to be done. Our health and human services programs are just blowing up. Something needs to be taken care of, with Social Security. We're in the position we are now just based on our spending increases that we've had. by allowing welfare to go on for 4 years at a time for people, things like that. But when you focus on Social Security and the actuarial debt that's sitting on the books that we're confronting, it's astounding. And if we're at 100% ratio now, in order to sustain what we have on the books in the future, we absolutely have to do something about it. And it's going to take some very careful maneuvering with the economy, with the amount that we spend, and with the amount that we allocate to these programs, to bring us to a position where we're back into a sustainable situation with debt and our overall GDP.
Well, Chris, I think the key word you just said there was sustainable. By the way, Common Sense News Time 725. This is the John Frederick Show. We're with Kris Weaver. He is the president of the Kris Weaver Real Estate Team, and here on the John Frederick Show, our economic guru. Chris, sustainability is the whole key. I think one of the things that people are really starting to get concerned with is the fact that there's no real plan that says we're going to, at some point, get to a balanced budget, which is going to take a combination, obviously, of spending reductions and tax increases. There's no other way. You're not going to grow out of this now. It's too big, and you're never going to get to 5%, which brings us to sequestration, which Budget Committee Chairman, GOP Congressman from Wisconsin, Paul Ryan, said is going to happen. Now, there are some Republicans who are saying, hey, maybe we just let sequestration take place because we'll get those cuts. It might be the only way we can cut some of the spending down. What say you?
Well, I think that's going to be, to a very careful degree, an important part of the equation. Sequestration is one of those things that if you just kind of let it run its course, cuts that are going to be incurred with different departments and the contracts that those departments currently have. When you look at the cuts and then you look at the contracts that I'll delve into one thing, for instance, defense. You might have a contract to buy 50 super expensive warbirds, okay? But you make a cut, so you drop it down to 30 units. Well, there's still a project cost to develop that special warbird, right? And that cost might be 50% over the overall project. So if you drop your units down to 30, you actually increase the cost per unit by double or triple. So you're paying 2 or 3 times per airplane or whatever to make that happen. And that kind of, the way contracts are set up, not just for the Defense Department, but many areas of our economy are set up just like that. So you really, it's got to be done very, very carefully, or we end up just making stupid moves, and that are not for the best, and we get a short-term gain on paper, but in the long term, we're not really realizing the true potential of our outputs, of our spending. I think where we really need to focus is we do need to make some cuts, but we also need to bring production up of our people. If we are just handing money out to people and allowing them to stay on welfare for years, they're not producing anything. And if we're trying to focus on not just cuts and not just trying to increase revenue a little bit and cut what we're spending, but we're also looking at the overall production of the economy, bringing more people online to produce goods and services, then you got to take away the means that they can sit in their couch and watch TV all day. You need to get them out there working. And unfortunately, sometimes that requires some hard choices to make people get out there. I'm not saying we should remove our social safety nets, but we need to be smart with what we're doing. If we bring more of our existing population into the economy, into a position of working, then we're going to have that GDP growth that we need, and we're going to have smart cuts, not too deep, and we're going to get ourselves out of it. Otherwise, we're going to pop ourselves into a Japanese deflationary style, super high GDP, debt to GDP ratio, and we're going to be stuck there. And I think they've been stuck there since the 80s. Isn't that correct?
They have since the early 80s, and it sounds like if we don't do something, we're going to end up somewhere in between Japan and Greece. Not a good position to be in. Hey, Kris Weaver, president of the Kris Weaver, that's with a K, real estate team. This is a top 100 real estate firm in the country as named by the Wall Street Journal. Kris, your organization is statewide. You're into just about every possible turnkey situation. Tell our audience very quickly, if you how they get more information on the Kris Weaver real estate team. What do they do? Where do they go?
Well, John, they can email me directly anytime. Even though I'm president of the company and my door is open, it's Kris, K-R-I-S, at KrisWeaver.com. They can visit our website, www.KrisWeaver.com. We have several highly trained agents that are ready to help, whether it's investing, purchasing, selling a home, or property management. So give us a call, visit our website anytime, and we're more than happy to help.
And you can also call the number 757-340-5555.
Sing it.
757-340, 4 5s in a row.
Kris, have a terrific weekend. We appreciate it as always. And very quickly, 49ers or Ravens, buddy boy?
49ers.